Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into global trade, economics, and all the big moves shaping the world today. Today, we're diving into a massive topic, the Canada-US trade clash of 2025, the role of critical minerals, energy exports, and how Prime Minister Mark Carney is navigating this high-stakes chess game with the United States and beyond. This is a story about tariffs, power, both electrical and geopolitical, and Canada's plan to come out stronger. If you've been following the news, you know that Canada and the United States have been locked in a trade tug-of-war for months now. It all kicked into high gear back in February 2025, when the White House, under President Donald Trump, slapped emergency tariffs on a bunch of countries, including Canada. These weren't small tariffs either. We're talking a hefty 35% on Canadian goods that don't comply with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA for short. Now, if you're wondering, what's USMCA? It's the trade deal that replaced NAFTA back in 2020, designed to keep trade flowing smoothly between the US, Canada, and Mexico. It's a big deal because it covers everything from cars to agriculture to energy, and it's supposed to keep tariffs low or non-existent for goods that meet its rules. So when Trump raised these tariffs, Canada didn't just sit back and take it. They hit back with their own countermeasures, targeting a wide range of US goods. Think everything from oranges to motorcycles to whiskey. This was Canada saying, "We're not messing around." But here's where things get interesting. Instead of doubling down and escalating the trade war further, Canada made a strategic pivot. Starting September 1st, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada would drop its retaliatory tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods. That's a big move. But, and this is key, they're keeping tariffs on US steel, aluminum and autos. Why? Because those are sectors where Canada has serious leverage, and they're not giving that up easily. Now you might be thinking, is this Canada backing down? Not at all. As Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc put it, this isn't a retreat, it's a reset. Canada's aligning itself with the USMCA rules, which cover about 85% of its trade with the US, making sure most goods flow tariff-free. Meanwhile, they're holding firm on steel, aluminum and autos, where the US relies heavily on Canadian supply. It's like Canada's saying, we'll play nice where it makes sense, but don't think we're out of cards to play. And trust me, Canada's got a strong hand in this game. Let's break it down. One of Canada's biggest strengths in this trade war is something you might not think about every day: electricity. Yeah, that invisible stuff that keeps your lights on and your phone charged. Canada is a powerhouse, pun intended, when it comes to exporting electricity to the United States. In 2024, Canada sent nearly 35.7 terawatt-hours of electricity south of the border. To put that in perspective, that's enough to power close to 1 million American homes, especially in northern states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. The value of those exports? A cool 3.1 billion Canadian dollars. Meanwhile, the US sent back about 20.9 terawatt-hours, according to the Canada Energy Regulator. So Canada's the clear net supplier here. Why does this matter? Because electricity isn't like oil or gas that you can stockpile in a barrel and ship later. It's got to move in real time, across power lines that connect Canada and the US grids. American utilities depend on Canada's reliability every single day. And here's the kicker: US electricity demand is going through the roof. Companies like Dominion Energy, which manages part of the Mid-Atlantic grid, are projecting that power demand could double over the next 15 years. Why? 2 words: data centers, okay? Maybe 3 words: artificial intelligence infrastructure. If you've been on the internet lately, you know AI is everywhere. ChatGPT, Grok, you name it. Those AI systems run on massive data centers that guzzle electricity like nobody's business. Add in the rise of electric vehicles and the push to electrify everything from homes to factories, and the US is facing a power crunch like we haven't seen in decades. Canadian hydropower, which is clean and often cheaper than other options, is a lifeline for northern US states. No tariff can change the physics of how electricity works, and that gives Canada a rock-solid position in these trade talks. It's like they're holding the switch to America's power grid. Pretty powerful, right? Now let's talk about another ace up Canada's sleeve: critical minerals. These are the raw materials that power modern technology. Think batteries, electric vehicles, solar panels, and even nuclear reactors. Canada is a major player here, and the US knows it. In 2023, Canada supplied about 27% of US uranium imports, according to the US Energy Information Administration. That's a big deal because the US cut off uranium imports from Russia, making Canadian supply even more critical for American nuclear power plants. And it's not just uranium. Canada's also a top producer of nickel, cobalt, and potash, stuff that's essential for EV batteries, agriculture, and more. Here's why this is huge. The US is trying to reduce its dependence on China, which dominates the global processing of these minerals. Both Democrats and Republicans agree that relying on China for critical minerals is a national security risk. Canada, with its stable political system and massive reserves, is one of the few reliable alternatives. For example, British Columbia alone has 16 types of critical minerals, including germanium, a key material for high-speed semiconductor chips used in everything from smartphones to military tech. There's a smelter in Trail, BC that's basically the only major North American source of germanium, employing about 1,500 people. If the US wants to keep its tech and defense industries humming, it needs Canada's minerals. This is where Prime Minister Mark Carney's strategy comes into play. He's not just sitting back and hoping the US plays nice, he's taking Canada's strengths global. This week, Carney's in Europe, meeting with leaders like the German Chancellor and CEOs from energy manufacturing and defense companies. His pitch? Canada isn't just North America's go-to supplier for energy and minerals, it can be Europe's too. Germany, for instance, is desperate for critical minerals to support its clean energy push and electric vehicle industry. They're also looking to counter China's grip on the global mineral market. Canada's got the goods, and Carney's making sure the world knows it. Let's zoom out for a second. The US is Canada's biggest trading partner. Over 75% of Canada's exports go there. That's huge, but it also makes Canada vulnerable to US policies like Trump's tariffs. Carney's response? Diversify, diversify, diversify. His trip to Europe isn't just about photo ops with fancy leaders, it's about building new trade bridges. Canada's already got a trade deal with the European Union, and Carney's looking to deepen those ties, especially in energy and critical minerals. He's also got meetings planned with leaders in Poland and Latvia, signalling that Canada's thinking beyond just Germany. Why does this matter? Because if Canada lock in more trade with Europe, it reduces its reliance on the US market. That's a big deal in a world where Trump's tariffs are designed to pressure Canada into giving in. Instead, Carney's turning the tables, showing Washington that Canada has options. If the US wants to keep Canada as its primary supplier of energy and minerals, it can't afford to push too hard. Otherwise, Canada might just start shipping more of its resources to Europe or other markets. It's a classic move. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So where does this leave us? Canada's not just reacting to Trump's tariffs, it's playing a long game. By dropping tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods, Carney's showing that Canada's committed to fair trade rules while keeping the pressure on where it counts, like steel, aluminum and autos. At the same time, he's strengthening Canada's position as an energy and mineral superpower, both at home and abroad. This isn't about caving to the US, it's about leveraging Canada's strengths to come out ahead. And let's not forget the timing. The USMCA is up for a big review in 2026, and Carney's already laying the groundwork for those talks. He's signaled that Canada won't rush into a bad deal just to meet some arbitrary deadline. Instead, he's practicing what analysts call strategic patience. By holding firm on key sectors and building new trade ties, Canada's keeping its leverage intact. It's like a high-stakes poker game, and Carney's not folding his hand just yet. All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room, President Donald Trump and his love for tariffs. If you've been following his second term, you know tariffs are his go-to tool for shaking things up. It's like he's got a playbook, and tariffs are on every page. Back in part 1, we talked about how he slapped 35% tariffs on Canadian goods that don't meet USMCA rules. But that's just one piece of a much bigger strategy. Trump's using tariffs to pressure countries, not just Canada, but also Europe, China, and others, to bend to his vision of bringing manufacturing back to the US. It's classic Trump. Threaten high, settle lower, but always keep the leverage. Take his deal with the European Union as an example. Earlier this summer, the US and EU released a joint statement laying out a new trade framework. The US is imposing tariffs of up to 15% on European imports, which sounds steep, but it's a lot better than the 250% Trump once threatened on things like pharmaceuticals. In return, Europe's dropping duties on US industrial goods, opening up markets for American agriculture and seafood, and committing to some massive purchases. Think $750 billion for US liquefied natural gas, oil and nuclear products through 2028, plus another $40 billion for American AI chips. That's a big win for the US, but it came at a cost for Europe. They had to accept a 15% tariff ceiling and make big concessions to secure market access. This is the Trump method in action. He starts with a big, scary number to get everyone's attention, then negotiates down to something that still gives the US an edge. It's not just about trade, it's about power. He's also sidestepping the World Trade Organization by focusing on bilateral deals, which let him set the terms. For Europe, it was a case of take the deal or face worse. But Canada's playing a different game. Unlike the EU, which rushed to lock in a framework, Canada's taking its time. After missing the August 1st, 2025 deadline for a new trade deal, Prime Minister Carney called Trump directly. The Canadian government called it a substantive and productive conversation, which is diplomat speak for we talked, but we're not giving in yet. No deal was announced, and that's deliberate. Canada's not ready to accept a fixed tariff ceiling just to move things along. Why? Because Canada's got stronger cards than Europe. The US relies on Canada for energy, minerals and integrated supply chains like autos that Europe can't match. For example, in 2024, Canada's energy exports to the US hit about $150 billion USD. That's oil, gas, electricity and uranium, all critical to keeping the US economy humming. Europe might have accepted 15% tariffs for certainty, but Canada's holding out for a better deal. Carney's betting on strategic patience, and it's a bold move. He's saying, we'll talk, but we're not signing anything unless it's good for Canada. While Carney's out there building bridges with Europe and keeping Trump on hold, he's also doubling down on strengthening Canada from within. This isn't just about trade talks, it's about making Canada a tougher player in the global economy. Let's look at what's happening at home. Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Carney have been working closely to shore up key industries like steel, autos and semiconductors. At a meeting in Ottawa this August, they laid out a plan to make Canada more competitive, especially in emerging sectors like artificial intelligence. One big focus is critical minerals. We touched on this in part 1, but it's worth digging deeper. Canada's got reserves of stuff like nickel, cobalt, germanium and graphite, materials that are absolutely essential for high-tech manufacturing. British Columbia alone is home to 16 types of critical minerals used in everything from solar panels to EV batteries to semiconductors. There's a smelter in Trail, BC, that's the only major North American source of germanium, a mineral critical for next-gen chips and defense tech. That smelter employs about 1,500 people and is a cornerstone of Canada's mineral strategy. Carney's government is pumping money into projects like this, think tens of billions of dollars, to get these minerals from mines to markets. But it's not just about digging stuff out of the ground. Canada's investing in the whole supply chain, mines, rail, ports, you name it. The goal is to make Canada the global supplier of choice for critical minerals, especially as the US and Europe try to break free from China's grip on the market. China still processes a huge chunk of the world's critical minerals, and that's a problem for Western countries. Canada's stepping up to fill that gap, and it's doing it under stable political conditions, which is something neither China nor Russia can offer. Then there's energy. Carney's got a big vision to turn Canada into an energy superpower. Right now, Canada supplies over 4 million barrels of oil per day to the US, more than 8 billion cubic feet of natural gas daily, and over 80% of US electricity imports. That's massive. But Carney's not stopping there. His government is investing in clean energy, solar, wind, hydrogen, and small modular nuclear reactors, while also promising to make Canada's oil and gas the lowest emission in the world. It's a balancing act. Keep the traditional energy flowing while building a greener future. And it's working. Canada's already the backbone of North America's energy system, and these investments are making it even stronger. Let's flip the script and look at what's happening south of the border. The US is facing a serious energy crunch, and it's only getting worse. Energy prices are climbing more than twice as fast as inflation. While the consumer price index rose by 2.7% over the past year, energy bills jumped by over 5.5%. Nearly 60 utility companies across the US are planning to raise rates in 2025, adding more than $38 billion in costs for electricity customers and another $3.2 billion for natural gas users. Why? Because demand for power is surging like never before. Think about it. Data centers for AI, electric vehicles, and the push to electrify everything from homes to factories are putting insane pressure on the US grid. Dominion Energy, which we mentioned earlier, says power demand could double in the next 15 years. That's not a typo, double. And the US grid is already aging, with coal plants being kept online longer than planned and new gas plants taking years to build. Oh, and get this. Turbine costs have tripled, and coal is still pricier than natural gas or renewables. All of this means higher bills for American consumers, and regulators are warning that those costs are only going up. This is where Canada comes in. The US can't meet this demand on its own, not without Canada's help. Canadian hydropower is a lifeline for northern states, and it's often the cheapest and cleanest option out there. Then there's oil and gas. Canada's supplying over 4 million barrels of oil a day and 8 billion cubic feet of natural gas. And don't forget uranium, which powers US nuclear plants. When Trump and Carney had their big phone call recently, you have to wonder if energy was at the top of the list. Ottawa described it as a wide-ranging conversation on trade and economic priorities. But let's be real. The US needs Canada's energy to make Trump's big manufacturing plans work. See, Trump's whole second term is built around bringing factories back to the US. He's slapping 100% tariffs on imported semiconductors, with exemptions only for companies that build in the US. He's also keeping 50% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and electrical equipment. The idea is to make it so expensive to import that companies have no choice but to set up shop in the US. But here's the catch. You can't run factories without energy, and you can't build them without minerals. Canada's got both in spades, and tariffs don't change that reality. If anything, they make Canada's role even more critical. Speaking of semiconductors, let's zoom in on Trump's latest big move. He's announced tariffs of 200% to 300% on imported chips, set to kick in as early as next week. Yeah, you heard that right. 300%. The plan is to force tech companies to move production to the US by making imports crazy expensive. He's even offering exemptions for companies that commit to building factories on American soil. It's a carrot-and-stick approach. Build here and you'll pay lower tariffs. Keep importing and you'll get crushed. Sounds bold, but there's a problem. Building a semiconductor industry from scratch isn't like flipping a switch. It takes years to set up advanced fabrication plants, clean rooms and lithography equipment. You also need thousands of skilled engineers and technicians, and those don't just appear overnight. Most importantly, you need raw materials, critical minerals like gallium, cobalt, graphite and germanium. Guess who's got a lot of those? Yup, Canada. And guess who's still the dominant global supplier of rare earths? China. With US-China relations as tense as they are, especially over things like Beijing's oil purchases from Russia, relying on Chinese minerals is a risky bet. This is where Canada's germanium smelter in Trail, BC, comes back into the picture. Germanium is a big deal for high-speed chips and optical components, stuff that silicon alone can't handle. It's critical for next-gen electronics and defense tech, and the US can't get it anywhere else in North America. Canada's also got reserves of other minerals like nickel and cobalt, which are key for EV batteries and AI hardware. Trump's tariffs might make headlines, but they don't solve the fact that the US depends on Canada for the raw materials it needs to make this manufacturing dream a reality. So what's Canada doing about all this? Carney's not just sitting back and hoping Trump's tariffs go away. He's building Canada's leverage for the long haul. At that August meeting with Doug Ford, they talked about steel, autos, semiconductors, and AI, not just as industries to protect, but as areas to grow. Canada's rolling out support packages for industries hit by US tariffs, but they're also investing big in critical mineral projects. We're talking tens of billions of dollars for mines, infrastructure, and supply chains, especially in places like British Columbia. This isn't just about surviving the trade war, it's about thriving after it. By scaling up its mineral production and clean energy capacity, Canada's positioning itself as the go-to supplier for the US, Europe, and beyond. If tensions with China keep rising, Canada's resources become even more valuable. And by diversifying its trade partners, Canada's making sure it's not too dependent on any one country, not even the US. All right, let's start with something that's been flying a bit under the radar. Canada's growing partnership with Mexico. In parts 1 and 2, we talked about how Canada's leveraging its energy exports and critical minerals to hold its own against US tariffs. But Carney's not just looking north and south, he's looking across the continent. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, ties these three countries together, and Canada's making sure it's not going it alone in this trade war. After missing the August 1st, 2025 deadline for a new trade deal with the US, Carney's been quietly strengthening ties with Mexico. Why? Because a united North American front is stronger than Canada going solo. Mexico's got its own issues with Trump's tariffs, think 50% duties on steel and aluminum, just like Canada. But Mexico also brings a lot to the table. A massive manufacturing base, especially in autos, and a growing role in electronics and aerospace. Together, Canada and Mexico supply critical pieces of the US economy, Canada with energy and minerals, Mexico with manufactured goods and labor. This partnership isn't just about trade numbers. It's about strategy. By aligning with Mexico, Canada's signaling to the US that it's not desperate for a deal. If Trump pushes too hard, Canada and Mexico can coordinate their responses, maybe even hit back with joint countermeasures. For example, the auto industry is a perfect case. The US, Canada, and Mexico have deeply integrated supply chains. Think car parts crossing borders multiple times before a vehicle's finished. Canada's keeping tariffs on US autos, and Mexico's holding firm on its own sectors. Together, they're reminding the US that disrupting these supply chains hurts everyone, including American consumers. Carney's also looking at Mexico as a partner in diversifying trade. While he's pitching Canada's energy and minerals to Europe, Mexico's doing the same with its manufacturing. If both countries can lock in more global markets, they reduce their dependence on the US. It's like building a safety net. If Trump's tariffs get too crazy, Canada and Mexico have other options. This teamwork could be a game changer as the USMCA heads toward its big review in 2026. More on that in a bit. Speaking of the USMCA, let's talk about what's coming down the pipeline. The agreement has a built-in review scheduled for 2026, and it's shaping up to be a make-or-break moment for North American trade. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has already sounded the alarm, warning that Trump could try to reopen or even walk away from the USMCA as early as November 2025. That's a big deal because the USMCA isn't just a trade deal. It's the backbone of $1.5 trillion in annual trade between the US, Canada, and Mexico. If Trump blows it up, it could throw supply chains, industries, and economies into chaos. Why would Trump even consider this? It's part of his playbook. He's already shown with Europe that he's not afraid to rewrite trade rules to favor the US. The USMCA's review gives him a chance to push for changes that tilt the playing field even more. Think higher tariffs, stricter rules on Canadian and Mexican goods, or demands for bigger US market access. But here's the thing. Walking away from the USMCA isn't as easy as it sounds. Economy relies heavily on Canada and Mexico, $150 billion in Canadian energy exports alone in 2024, plus Mexico's role in everything from cars to electronics. Disrupting that could spike prices for American consumers and tank industries like autos that depend on cross-border supply chains. Canada's preparing for this fight. Carney's strategic patience, holding off on a quick deal and keeping tariffs on key US sectors, gives Canada leverage heading into 2026. He's also got a domestic plan to back it up. Canada's rolling out support packages for industries hit by tariffs like softwood lumber and supply-managed agriculture, think dairy and poultry. These supports aren't just about short-term relief, they're about keeping these sectors strong so Canada can negotiate from a position of power. And by teaming up with Mexico, Canada's building a united front to push back against any US attempts to gut the USMCA. It's like Carney saying, "We're ready for whatever you throw at us." Now let's zoom in on Trump's big vision, bringing manufacturing back to the US. It's the cornerstone of his second term, and he's betting big on tariffs to make it happen. We talked about his 200% to 300% tariffs on semiconductors in Part 2. Tariffs designed to force tech companies to build factories in the US. It's not just chips, though. Steel, aluminum, electrical equipment, transformers, you name it. Trump's slapping tariffs on it to tilt the playing field toward domestic production. The idea is simple. Make imports so expensive that companies have no choice but to set up shop in the US. But here's the problem. Manufacturing needs two things, energy and raw materials. And guess who's got a lot of both? Canada. Let's break it down. The US is facing an energy crunch like we haven't seen in decades. Energy prices are rising over twice as fast as inflation, 5.5% for energy versus 2.7% for the Consumer Price Index. Nearly 60 US utility companies are planning rate hikes in 2025, adding $38 billion in electricity costs and $3.2 billion for natural gas. Why? Because demand is skyrocketing. Data centers for AI, electric vehicles, and electrification are pushing the grid to its limits. Canadian hydropower, oil, and gas are keeping the lights on in the US, and there's no quick way to replace that. Then there's raw materials. Semiconductors, EVs, and clean energy tech all rely on critical minerals like germanium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite. Canada's a major supplier, especially for germanium from that smelter in Trail, British Columbia, and uranium for US nuclear plants. China still dominates global mineral processing, but Canada's reserves are a stable, friendly alternative. Trump's tariffs might pressure companies to build in the US, but without Canada's energy and minerals, those factories are just expensive shells. Building a semiconductor plant takes years. Think advanced fabrication facilities, clean rooms, and thousands of skilled workers. You can't just snap your fingers and make it happen, no matter how high the tariffs go. This is where Canada's leverage shines. Trump's manufacturing dream depends on resources the US doesn't have enough of on its own. Canada's not just a supplier, it's the supplier the US can't afford to alienate. That recent phone call between Trump and Carney? It's no coincidence. Ottawa called it a productive discussion on trade and economic priorities, but you have to wonder if Trump was starting to realize how much he needs Canada to make his vision work. Tariffs might grab headlines, but they don't change the fact that North America's economy runs on Canadian resources. Let's wrap this up by looking at Canada's big picture strategy. Prime Minister Carney's not just playing defense against Trump's tariffs, he's got a vision to turn Canada into a global energy superpower. We've talked about Canada's massive energy exports, 4 million barrels of oil per day, 8 billion cubic feet of natural gas, and over 80% of US electricity imports. But Carney's looking beyond the status quo. His government's investing in clean energy, solar, wind, hydrogen, and small modular nuclear reactors, while also making Canada's oil and gas the lowest emission in the world. It's a bold plan to balance traditional energy with a greener future. Then there's critical minerals. Canada's pouring tens of billions into projects to mine and process materials like nickel, cobalt, and germanium. British Columbia is leading the charge with 16 types of critical minerals, but other provinces like Ontario and Quebec are stepping up too. The goal? Make Canada the go-to supplier for the US, Europe, and beyond, especially as tensions with China make Western countries nervous about their supply chains. By building infrastructure to connect mines to markets, Canada's ensuring it can deliver these resources reliably. This isn't just about trade, it's about geopolitical power. If Canada can lock in Europe as a major customer for its energy and minerals, it reduces its reliance on the US. That gives Carney more leverage in trade talks, whether it's with Trump or the next administration. It's also a signal to the world. Canada's not just a resource-rich country, it's a stable, innovative partner in a turbulent global economy. As Trump pushes his America First agenda, Canada's quietly building a Canada First strategy that could reshape North American trade for decades. So what's the takeaway from all this? The Canada-US trade clash of 2025 isn't just about tariffs. It's a contest of leverage, strategy, and vision. Trump's using tariffs to force manufacturing back to the US, but his plan hinges on energy and minerals that Canada supplies. Carney's playing a smarter game, dropping tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods to show fairness, keeping pressure on key sectors like steel and autos, and building new trade ties with Europe and Mexico. He's also investing in Canada's future, energy, minerals, and innovation, to make sure the country comes out stronger, no matter what happens in Washington. The USMCA review in 2026 will be the next big test. If Trump tries to rewrite or scrap the deal, Canada's ready with its energy exports, mineral reserves, and continental partnerships. It's not about winning every battle, it's about winning the war. And right now, Canada's holding a lot of the cards. We've covered the trade war, energy exports, critical minerals, Trump's tariffs, and Carney's plan to make Canada an energy superpower. What do you think? Will Canada's strategy pay off, or is Trump's tariff game too tough to beat? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if you want more videos like this. If you enjoyed this series, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the stories shaping our world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious, stay informed, and let's keep the conversation going.